There is a public health crisis that has flown under the radar screen in the Black community for far too long. It's responsible for more than 45,000 deaths each year in our community, and barely anyone is talking about it. Our civil rights groups, our social justice groups, and even some of our churches have been co opted. You may ask, what is this public health crisis? Well, this public health crisis is the result of the targeting of our community and brown communities by big tobacco with their products. This public health crisis is caused by nicotine addiction. This public health crisis is caused by menthol cigarettes. And as a result, many of our people are dying each year from tobacco related illnesses. And big tobacco is writing checks to many of our community groups, and we end up not talking about this in the way that we should. This week, we're going to discuss this public health crisis with Dr. Phil Gardiner, a public health expert and a member of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. Welcome to this week's episode of Faithful Witness with Terrance Carroll. I'm Terrance Carroll, an ordained Baptist minister, a public theologian, lawyer, and former Speaker of the Colorado House of Representatives. Faithful Witness with Terrance Carroll is grounded in the prophetic tradition of the Black church, and we explore the moral questions shaping our culture, democracy, and society. Thanks for taking time to watch, and I hope that you enjoy and learn from this week's episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Faithful Witness with Terrance Carroll. And I'm glad to have with me this week Dr. Phil Gardiner with the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. As many of you know, one of the biggest issues that we have facing the Black community today, and it has been for a long time, is how many of our communities, many of our neighborhoods are flooded with tobacco products. For me, this is a very personal issue. My mother, who passed away in 2002, was targeted in many ways by big tobacco. She spent years and years and years smoking cools and the menthol ones, I believe. And we used to get in big fights all the time because as a kid, I even knew that it was problematic. So I would go and steal her cigarettes in the middle of the night and go hide them. Oftentimes I would throw them away and she would get so mad at me. And just to show you how insidious tobacco addiction is, and it is an addiction in my opinion, so even after my mother had dementia and Alzheimer's and was sundowning and was on oxygen, she still would fight to try to get cigarettes. She was always demanding cigarettes, even as her brain was in decline and her body was in decline. And so for me, that was always an indication of just how powerful nicotine is and how powerful it is that it draws your body in even as your body is failing. So I'm glad that I have Dr. Phil here today, and not that Dr. Phil, we have the better Dr. Phil, but I'm glad that we have Dr. Phil here today to talk about the mission of AATCLC and what we can do and why this is a moral and ethical issue. And for my friends who want to know what does this have to do with the church, it's also a theological issue. It's a theological issue in so many important ways, and we'll get into that a little bit. And I think you'll understand as we ask questions of Dr. Phil and the work that they're doing at AATCLC. That's even a lot for an acronym. I'm just going to say that out loud, but it's much shorter than saying the whole name of the organization. And I've looked at their website, and you should go to their website as well. They're doing a lot of good work around the country, fighting the good fight on behalf of our people. So again, welcome, Dr. Phil. So you've done a lot of work where you describe the disproportionate marketing of menthol and flavored tobacco products to the Black community, not just as a health crisis, but as outright discriminatory and genocidal. Can you unpack that powerful language for our listeners and share the core mission of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council?
Well, look, Terrance, thanks for having me on. I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. Just a remembrance and a comment on your mother. It just shows you how addictive nicotine is, that even when you're dying, the body is still demanding it, and why we need to get rid of it. The African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council was formed in 2008 after funding was cut in the state of California for priority populations. It became clear that if there's something going to be done about smoking among Black folks, different parts of people doing tobacco control, particularly Dr. Valerie Yerger at the University of California, San Francisco, Carroll Magruder, who was leading work in Hunters Point, and myself, I worked at the Office of the President for the University of California, got together with a number of our colleagues and formed the AATCLC. The take home message for your viewers is the main killer of African Americans for the last 70, 80 years has been tobacco products, and specifically menthol products. It was determined in the late 1950s and early 1960s that the messages put out by the tobacco industry was resonating more with African Americans, so they pushed these products essentially down our throats. There were opportunities, there were promotions, the Cool Jazz Festival arose, um, all sorts of things took place where they poured literally millions and millions of dollars into our community. Um, this is the short story, and I'll stop after this and we can go on. Um, in 1953, about 5% of African Americans smoked menthol cigarettes. By 1968, that had almost tripled to 14%. By 1976, that had tripled again to 42%. By the early 2000s, that had doubled to 85%. That's not by word of mouth, okay? That's by predatory marketing on the part of the tobacco industry, in terms of this. Leading cause of death for African Americans, heart disease, lung cancer, stroke, all brought about by cigarettes, and in particular, menthol cigarettes. That's what we're fighting for. Even though we started in California, we're nationwide. We work in a number of different places. I can get into that more later, but that's the backstory, and at some point at the end, we'll explain why the long name. Um, we know it's long, and there's a story, but you picked up on it.
We might as well jump a little bit ahead and talk about the long name because I suspect that it's really important to our discussion today.
No, and we got together in 2008. We had our first in-person meeting in 2009. And, we're for this, we're for that, but we spent most of the day talking about what we're gonna call ourselves. And we went back and forth, but it had to have African American in it. That's number one, and that's long in it by itself. It had to have tobacco in it. That's long in and of itself. We're in tobacco control, even though we're much more than just control. We want to fight it, but that was the proper wording at that time. And then we had to determine what we were. Were we a were we an organization? Were we we kept saying a council, but there's all sorts of councils. So we said, oh, we're a leadership council. So, but when you put it all together, I mean, that's a long term African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. And we went back and forth and back and forth. And I think the vote was something like 15-8 to do that. Um, and we've even approached it again a number of times in the last 20 years or so. But that's where they came from. It was the main issue. We've decided to keep the name, and then people know who we are around the country now. So, good question. Good question.
I want to go back to something that you said earlier about predatory marketing, going way back to the 50s and efforts to make tobacco look cool, to make it look like it gave you some type of swagger, or as the kids say, some type of riz. Uh, what did that marketing look like then? We talked about the Cool Jazz Festival, and I'm old enough to remember it, but I'm not old enough to have attended. a cool jazz festival. But beyond the jazz festivals, what else how else did this marketing look like, and what does it look like today in our communities?
That's an excellent question, and it would be great at some point to do a PowerPoint presentation for your organization to actually show you, but I'll give you an example. By the by 1969 and 1970, they had advertisements for Kools and for Newports with brothers wearing dashikis, with afros, with beads. They were implementing looking like we did. They had brothers in, um, black, leather coats looking like the Panthers. Then one of my favorites is in the mid-70s, they have a brother in a suit and a tie on the basketball court, um, you know, um, saying that, Newport, is great and, because we love basketball. So they've got a brother in a suit and a tie on a basketball court. By the early '90s, they've got brothers in a dance hall talking about "Fired Up." Okay? They got our idiom down. Um, in the early 2000s, they got hip hop and they got folks wearing DJ uniforms. They have they've captured the culture and put it back into an addictive product. It's amazing. We have a video, when menthol cigarettes first came out in the mid 1950s, the ads for menthol showed a white couple in the meadow, breezy, all green, etc. 6 years later, in 1963, here's Elston Howard, African American catcher for the New York Yankees, selling menthol cigarettes. Look, in 1963 is the march into Selma. 1963 is the bombing of the church. 1963 is the march on Washington. The tobacco industry got ahead of that. They had executive offices in North Carolina and Virginia that were populated or um, populated, yeah, by African Americans. When we couldn't sit at the lunch counter, you could get an advanced job in the tobacco industry. They got us from all sides. And as you mentioned earlier, they began to pour money, unfortunately, and still do, into our civil rights, social, and other political organizations around the country.
Yeah, I want to put a pin in their co-optation of social justice movements, our civil rights organizations, and come back to that in a little bit. Uh, so, so we've talked about, the predatory marketing. We've talked about, the health ills that it forces on the Black community disproportionately. And just in a moment of transparency, my mother's first major medical issue was a heart attack, which the doctor said that she had heart disease, and it was likely caused by a lifetime of smoking, or at least heavy smoking. She would go through packs of cigarettes a day. And I know that, I mean, I was a child for part of it. And even as a child, I knew that could not be healthy to go through cartons of cigarettes a day. And she was not the only one in our community. All of the kids in our neighborhood dutifully would make our way down to the corner store on a regular basis to buy cigarettes for our parents, because it was rare for one of our parents not to smoke. And then when I found pictures of my mother when she was younger, every single person in her friend group in the country in Southern Maryland, they all had cigarettes in their hand constantly. And it just seems like it so problematic. And I'm trying to be still objective and not get emotional about this
You
because
should
I
get
do
emotional.
believe cigarettes, I think it killed, like, I think they led to my mother's death in very real ways.
No,
Um,
let me
so,
just say the same thing. We tease about that. I I take the note down to the corner store and get the pack of cigarettes for my father. After a while, I didn't even need to take the note. They knew who I was, they knew what the deal was, and I would take it home. When my mother called me in early 1977, my father had died of a heart attack. There was his pack of cigarettes sitting right by the bed. So you're not alone, sir. I and this it's the same story. This is the black experience in the United States. First, they made us pick it, then they made us smoke it.
Yeah, we picked that which led to our physical destruction. And in fact, physical destruction on both ends. They beat our body down in tobacco fields in the South, and then started destroying our bodies from the inside out by ingesting the nicotine from the cigarettes. So, what is AATCLC doing? What type of programs and projects do you have to counter? And there's probably no better way to put it, this attack on the health of our community.
Well, we work on it from this is the key question. What to it's one thing, they're killing us, they've been doing that since day one. So what are we trying to do about it? We're working at a number of different levels. I'm going to start with the policy level. We're working at policy level in local communities around the country to remove menthol and all flavored tobacco products from the market. Today, there is somewhere in the neighborhood of 140 localities that have removed menthol and all flavored tobacco products. Now, there's another 200 or 300 places where we've removed some menthol and we've removed some flavors, but not all, or you can buy them in a grocery, you can buy them in an adult store, but you can't buy them here. So there's all these little ins and outs. So there's a few more of them. Um, we in California, have done that statewide and passed a resolution, an ordinance in 2022. Massachusetts did it in 2020. So there are two states that have done that. Trying to get this done at the state level has been very hard, so that's why we've worked at the local level. Currently, there's battles going on. There are a number, I would say 10 to 15 cities in Minnesota that have adopted no menthol legislation. Let me tell you how complex it is. We worked in Minnesota 10 years ago, um, 2015, 2016, and got Minneapolis and St. Paul to pass resolutions, but they had caveats that you could still buy menthol cigarettes at a liquor store.
Hmm.
Well, where do black men, where do black folks buy their cigarettes? Okay, so while it was a start, you couldn't buy it anyplace else, but you could buy it where you usually bought it. We got that done in St. Paul and Minneapolis and in Duluth. And then in Oakland, where I was, we passed a law in 2017 that says you couldn't buy menthol cigarettes, but you could only buy it at a smoke shop. And in 2017, there was 5, 6, 7 smoke shops in Oakland. By 2020, there were 55. Okay. They put a different address on another side of the store and sell menthol cigarettes on that side of the store. We finally got some legislation passed there. Of course, the thing that has set off great movement in the United States is what went down in San Francisco, where they outlawed it all the way. Just no, 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 no. And I have to give a shout out to Dr. Valerie Yerger and Carroll Magruder that led that fight. And I helped in that too. Be aware at the national level, we actually got the House of Representatives through the leadership of the Congressional Black Caucus to pass a resolution in 2019 that they took a vote on in 2020 to remove menthol cigarettes from the marketplace. They sent it to the Senate. Mitch McConnell put it on the floor, not the floor of the Senate, but the floor of his office. It never saw the light of day. Once Biden got into office, we actually got a law that was before the the FDA, the Federal Department of you know
The Drug Administration.
yeah, the Drug Administration. But the point was we got it in front of them. They said they were going to do something about it. The tobacco industry intervened. Other people intervened from the black community, said, if you do this, you'll be hurting black people. Listen to that. Listen to what we just talked about earlier. They said, if you intervene, you're going to be hurting black people. and they moved it away. It never got to a vote. And then to add insult to injury, when Donald Trump took office, the second day in office, he was, elected, and the thing on, January 20th. On January 21st, he removed the law altogether. There's nothing happening at the federal level right now. If we can get rid of him or we can get some Democrats back in control of the House, we can reintroduce, laws. Look how bad it's become. Trump eliminated the Office on Smoking and Health, the main killer of people in the world, in the United States, main killer of black folk.
The whole idea of how this is targeted and where it's targeted, it does continue to be an issue. I remember years ago, it feels funny to say years ago at this point, but when I was a student at Morehouse when I graduated in 1992, it was the same year as the Rodney King uprising after he was acquitted. And as part of our negotiation with the city for us to stop protesting, we pushed the city to stop providing new business licenses and permits for smoke shops that were disproportionately in the neighborhood surrounding the Atlanta University Center. Because you could go up to Emory, you could go to Agnes Scott, you can go to some other PWIs in Atlanta, you did not see the predominance of smoke shops in the community that you saw in the West End, which also happened to be one of the poorest areas of Atlanta. And it just seemed ridiculous that we were targeted with all of these things, especially when you look at, as you talked about earlier, the staggering statistics regarding the impact of nicotine and menthol on the Black community, which leads me to ask the question that with such negative impacts on our community, disastrous impacts, why does this still continue to fly under the radar for the most part, that it's not talked about as much as it probably should be?
This is, it's an excellent point. We have a great chart, and you're making excellent points. Tobacco-related diseases in the African American communities kill more people than homicides, car accidents, AIDS, and all sorts of other things combined. You hear about the shooting and down on the corner and 3 black folks got killed and 4 wounded, and it's in the papers for 3, 4 days. During that same time, another 50 or 60 black folks around the country have died from tobacco-related disease. Not should we not that we should downplay these other events. We need to fight against that too. But let's be clear what we're dying that under the radar, when you have the tobacco industry, um, let me give you a sense. In 2019, the tobacco industry's worth was somewhere in the neighborhood of $273 billion. Just one of the 6th largest corporation in the world when you took them all together. That's what we're fighting against. We we're showing up and, you've been to college and I've been to college, and we don't have $270 billion. That's why it's flown under the register. The other reason it's flown under there, when you look at the amount of money that they've put into the political system, unfortunately, a number of members of the Congressional Black Caucus take money from the tobacco industry. Al Sharpton takes money from the tobacco industry. All sorts of people, the National Urban League. Uh, we're up against a lot here. We're up against Ben Chavis. It's unfortunate, but that's what we're confronted with.
From what I understand, I think these numbers are correct that roughly 45,000 Black lives are lost every year to tobacco related illnesses. That's a huge number.
That's incredible. I mean, there's a lot of people getting shot, but they're not the. It's incredible. 45,000 Black folks a year. That's why the AATCLC is with us. I need to mention another part of what we do is work the cessation side of things. Some folks call it liberation from nicotine. But as you pointed out earlier, this is one of the hardest drugs in the world to get off of. You know why they say that? When you're trying to get off heroin, um, when you're trying to get off cocaine, you can really, "Wow, that was really bad. I really da 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 da." Nicotine isn't like that. You don't feel bad until you feel bad. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? You know, there's a great, picture in the 17th century, late 1600s of, you can see the clock on the steeple on the church. Says 11:30, and then there are drunk people all over the plaza. How are you gonna have an industrial revolution with people who are drunk at 11:30? W If you found another substance that they could use and use all their life for 30 years until they die, then you can have an industrial revolution. It's incredible what they've done. So getting off these products, um, becomes a key part of it, and we need to have cessation services that are culturally appropriate, language specific, and available for all.
I want to transition because you mentioned Al Sharpton and the Urban League and some members of the Congressional Black Caucus to this hijacking is probably the better way. I was too nice when I said it's co-opted. It's really a hijacking of some of our civil rights groups and our social justice movements. And so how does big tobacco, in your opinion, exploit social justice arguments to protect their profit margins?
Much better than we do, that's for sure. When you do a little deeper dive into all of this, when California was moving to get its bill passed, in 2020, who was the main argument? Who was doing the main mobilizing against it? It was the Southern Christian Leadership Council. Almost slapped myself when I found that out. And we looked into it, and that the industry was pouring money into that, and they were pouring money into African American preachers in Southern California and Northern California to lead marginal Black people, some homeless and some just needing money, and mobilizing them to go to Sacramento, the state capital, to protest against these bills. The Southern Christian Leadership Council
Yeah. My
can't even
my my jaw just dropped. My, my,
no, you can't make that up, you know? Um, we even we even have pictures of them handing out the money. So, it's been very difficult. Long story short, my doctor in the 1990s, African American woman, we were in graduate school together. She's a great lady. I'm gonna leave the names out of it. Uh, she leaves, goes to I think Leah goes to Louisiana. Next thing I know that I find out no, that she doesn't do it, but her brother, he's the head of the Urban League. I'm forgetting his name right now. Um, and Urban League takes money. Now, what's good about the Urban League is that, local organizations can do what they want, and some organizations are fighting for it, and some organizations are taking the money. The good story is, let me give you 2 good stories. The NAACP in 2016, because of the work of Carroll Magruder, passed a national resolution in support of removing menthol from the marketplace. Derek Johnson, who's the head of the NAACP now, is a strong supporter of that. In 2013 and 2017, the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Inc. Passed resolutions calling on the removal of menthol from the marketplace. That was Dr. Valerie Yerger. So there's been some significant, you know, advancements in the fight, but there's still a we still got a ways to go. Um, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to keep it up.
well, I'm thankful that you're still here and keeping up the good fight. One of the things that I do is if I'm going to a Black event, I actually look to see who the sponsors are. If your sponsors are engaged in things that are, especially tobacco, where it appears that they're taking actions that are directly antithetical to the health of our community, and they know it is, and they still keep doing it, and you take their money, I'm going to have a little bit of an issue and probably not go to your event. I even do it with my own denomination, the National Baptist, when we have clergy events. I always check to make sure that our sponsors reflect our theological commitments. And thankfully, I haven't had to say, "Hey, I'm not coming to anything at this point." But there does seem to be this uh, uh, direct attack through co-optation, through hijacking in order to change the message or make us ignore the message. So my next question is, in light of all that, how do grassroots advocates like yourself navigate through all of this? And how can our community discern who is truly standing up for our collective health versus those people who are compromised?
Well, you we do the well, when you're saying that, we do the same thing that you do. When these events are being put on nationwide and we have people traveling to them, who is the sponsor? Who's paying for this stuff? The Congressional Black Caucus Foundation has an annual meeting in the end of September every year. The tobacco industry has been a main sponsor of that for a long time. We're clear of that. There used to be fights. Well, not used to be. Well, yeah, there used to be fights at the hearings, because they would then have a section where they'd bring members of the tobacco industry. Al Sharpton would bring the mothers of the movement, who were the women whose sons had been killed by the police, um, and argue that that was because of this law trying to get menthol cigarettes off the market. There's a lot of discussion about the end game, removing all tobacco products. And of course, I'm a doctor of public health. I think that's the that would save just tens of millions of lives. The first step in that, though, we need to get rid of flavors. We've got to get rid of menthol. We've got to get rid of these vaping products that have all these flavors in them, these pouches, all of them flavors that belong in candy. They don't belong in tobacco, in nicotine. Nicotine is a deadly substance. That's unfortunately what it is.
And the flavors are really a form of grooming. When I was a child, you could go to the corner store and get the cigarette bubble gum that looked like an actual cigarette or a cigarillo or a small cigar. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it really was grooming us to normalize smoking cigarettes as part of your everyday existence. Thankfully, we don't see that anymore in the stores. At least I haven't seen those in the store. But in many ways, flavored tobacco, flavored vaping tools are an effort to make it seem harmless, that you're just smoking someone with a cherry flavor or strawberry flavor, not realizing what the underlying harm is to your body.
They try to promote these things. Look, electronic cigarettes are not just water vapor. There's no water in them. There's nicotine, there's flavors, there's propylene glycol, and there's glycerin. In fact, and this makes me so mad, and let me just do it shortly. In April of this year, the Food and Drug Administration identified propylene glycol and glycerin as put on the list of ingredients in cigarettes that are harmful. 3 weeks later, in the early part of May, the FDA approved all these new electronic cigarettes, 'cause and those are the main components of it. Let me just say another word about some of these new products. There's been a lot of talking about, well, what about what about marijuana? It's safe, it's natural. Let me suggest to you that smoke is smoke. If you're burning leaves in the driveway, if it's a forest fire, if it's a joint, or if it's a cigarette, they all are what we call biomasses. They all have the same chemicals in it. There's different, there's THC in marijuana and nicotine in tobacco, but the rest of those chemicals, um, styrene and toluene and benzopyrene, all these organic nicotine products, all these organic carcinogens, excuse me, are in these same products. It's only this year or last year that they began to tell firefighters to wear a mask because it's okay. Smoke is smoke. Smoke is
That is
smoke.
true. Smoke does the same thing to your lungs no matter what the smoke is
Thank
in
you.
many regards. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I want to take a slight pivot because, but it's related. It's about what can the community do, and because my primary community is, in the Black community, as a Black preacher, as I like to say, I'm Baptist born, Baptist bred, and when I die, I'll be Baptist dead. That's just that's just who I am. And I know you all have an initiative called No Menthol Sunday. I'm not sure if you still do it, but I suspect you still do. So, how crucial is the Black church and faith based organizing in reclaiming the narrative, educating families, and building a grassroots infrastructure to resist, these predatory practices and to bring attention to these practices to our community?
That's a great point. In 2014, I was in a conference in Atlanta, Georgia. We were meeting with a group now that was named something else then, but the Center for Black Health and Equity now, and the AATCLC. And it was a ministers meeting, a clergy meeting, and talking about what the Black church could do in support of getting Black folks off tobacco. And of course, we talked about education, this, and how bad it is, and we should do small groups. And as we're walking away, we realized that World No Tobacco Day, this international day, usually falls on May 31st. And May 31st in, I believe, 2014 fell on a Sunday. And as we're walking out, the thing was over, and there's about 4 or 5 of us walking together. So if it's going to fall on a Sunday, that's church day. What could we do that would be special for the African American community? And the as we bounce it around, we came, well, let's call it No Menthol Sunday. And No Menthol Sunday has grown into a national and even to some extent an international event, where on that day, you go to the church, we make this an issue, you talk about the history and practice of how Black folks have first picked it and then smoked it and how it's mainly killing us. Getting preachers involved, getting the clergy, getting the members of the church involved. What we've begun to do, No Menthol Sunday can be done on any Sunday. In fact, No Menthol Sunday can be done any time of the week. We've been doing for the last year or so what we call No Menthol Poetry Slams, where we go around the country, get groups of local poets and, spoken word artists to do poetry around no menthol. It can be done on a Sunday, be done on a Friday night. Um, and there's a way to get the church involved. In fact, we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the Black church. I'm clear on that. I may not be a church attender, but I know from whence I come and from whence I are. I know where Martin came from and where Malcolm came from, um, and where we're going. So involving the church is critical. It's been the main institution in the African American experience, and it will continue to be. And since it will continue to be, I how many times when you're outside church when it's over, somebody is outside smoking a cigarette? Um, I'll rest there. So yes, No Menthol Sunday is a great thing. It can be any Sunday, it can be any day, but attributing a session on this issue is very, very important.
And I'm going to have to remember to make sure that we get this on the calendar at my church. Our mutual friend is a member of the same, we attend the same church. And so I'm going to work with her and make sure that we, get this done at our church back here in Denver because it is something important for
Is
us to
it
stand up for. What's that?
is this Selena?
It's Selena.
Yeah, no, yes. Let me just say something about Denver. We fought the good fight there and got menthol removed from the marketplace, but we have a huge fight coming up. and that's in Aurora. Um, Aurora, as some of your guests may know, and people listening, has now become the major prod is going they're building a pouch plant in Aurora. Pouches, with nicotine and flavors in it are becoming the new norm and getting people addicted. That
Mm,
plant is being built in Aurora. We're gonna take up the menthol fight there. Um, Hopefully, when I come to Denver and to Aurora, I'll see you, and we can talk.
absolutely. I want to go to our final question and reflection. This podcast is really about what it means to be a faithful witness in the public square, standing up for justice and equity and the preservation of our communities. When you look at the long, grueling fight against this industry, what gives you faith and the stamina to keep fighting for Black lives?
I remember walking to school one day in 1968. I just was at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I was there on a basketball scholarship. It was October 14th. I walked by North Hall, the computer center, and there the Black Student Union had taken over the computer center and was demanding African American Black studies. And I finally got I was completely pissed after Martin had been killed earlier that year and was a little, frankly, a little disarranged and not clear where to do, what to go. I walked by and saw that. I joined them. I've been in the fight ever since. I'm going to stay in the fight for Black folks. I happened to have gone back to school and got a doctorate and got involved in public health, but that didn't change the fight. That's just another angle in the fight. The fight is many-sided. Um, what keeps me going? There's a there's a great thing out of slavery that I use as my motivation. It's taken from slaves, and they would tell each other, "Make sure you hold on to the plow. No matter whatever, who's getting beat over here or who's getting cussed out over here, just keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing, because then we'll be able to do something afterwards." So then that got transformed into, and to answer your question, remember, the the first thing we did right was the day we started to fight. Keep your eye on the
Mm.
prize. Hold on. Hold on. So that's who I am. That's what I'm about. I ain't going nowhere. I'm just not.
And I think we're all thankful for that. And that's a great way to close. And thank you for being with me today on the Faithful Witness with Terrance Carroll podcast. And for those of you who are watching this and listening to this, again, thank you for taking time out of your day to watch and listen to this podcast. Help me out, help the podcast out, like, subscribe, tell your friends you like it, help the algorithm find this. And remember to tell the truth, seek justice, and love the people. This is Faithful Witness. Thank you very much.